December 19th, 1916, 2:47 p.m. Approximately 150 miles southwest of Ireland, 51 degrees 20 minutes north, 11 degrees 40 minutes west. Captain Lieutenant Werner Furbringer of U-83 raised his periscope and studied the tramp steamer struggling through heavy seas. The vessel appeared to be approximately 3,000 tons, flying Norwegian colors, making perhaps 8 knots with a visible list to starboard. Her deck cargo, what looked like timber, had shifted badly. Through his Zeiss optics, Furbringer counted 3 crew members visible on deck, apparently attempting to secure the load. The steamer showed every sign of distress. No smoke from auxiliary boilers, minimal wake suggesting engine trouble, and that telltale list indicating possible hull damage or flooding. It was exactly the kind of target German Naval Warfare Instruction 1916 had trained him to engage without wasting a torpedo. Furbringer was no novice. With 18 months of operational experience and 7 confirmed merchant kills, he understood submarine warfare's economics. Torpedoes cost 24,000 marks each, required careful maintenance, and U-83 carried only 6. German doctrine, refined through 2 years of unrestricted submarine warfare, was explicit. Surface, identify the target, order crew to lifeboats, sink vessel with deck gun ammunition at 100 marks per shell. The mathematics favored the deck gun for vessels under 5,000 tons, showing no defensive armament. The Imperial German Navy's 1916 prize regulations specified these procedures in detail, emphasizing torpedo conservation for warships and large, valuable merchants. He scanned the horizon carefully. No smoke, no escorts, no wireless masts suggesting the vessel had called for help. The nearest patrol routes were 40 miles north. Weather conditions, force 6 winds, 12-foot seas, would prevent rapid response even if the merchant had transmitted distress. Furbringer made his decision and gave the order to surface. What Captain Lieutenant Furbringer didn't know, what no German submarine commander would fully understand until the Admiralstab's confidential assessment of February 1918, was that the British Admiralty had transformed approximately 180 merchant vessels into elaborately disguised warships specifically designed to exploit German surface engagement doctrine, and that the struggling Norwegian freighter 700 yards off his bow was His Majesty's ship Farnborough, a Q-ship carrying 4 concealed 12-pounder guns, and a crew of 85 Royal Navy personnel trained to wait until German submarines were committed to surface action before revealing their true nature. German submarine doctrine in 1916 reflected sound operational logic derived from 2 years of commerce, warfare, and the fundamental mathematics of submarine operations. The Imperial German Navy's submarine school at Kiel, established in 1910 under Fregattenkapitän Hermann Bauer, taught commanders that torpedo conservation was essential to mission success. The curriculum emphasized that U-boats operating in the western approaches spent 14 days on station, but carried limited ordnance, typically 6 torpedoes for coastal boats, 8 to 12 for ocean-going types. Each torpedo represented significant investment: 24,000 marks for a G6 model, 31,000 marks for the newer G7, while deck gun ammunition cost 100 marks per 88mm shell or 150 marks per 105mm shell. The prize regulations, refined after the Lusitania crisis of May 1915, provided the tactical framework. German submarines were to stop merchant vessels, verify their cargo through examination of ship's papers, allow crew to abandon ship, then sink the vessel by gunfire or scuttling charges. Torpedoes were to be reserved for vessels that fled, fought back, or were too valuable to risk surface engagement. This doctrine reflected not merely humanitarian concerns, but operational necessity. A submarine that expended all torpedoes on merchants in the first days of patrol returned to base having accomplished a fraction of its potential destruction. The German Naval Staff's assessment of 1915 operations confirmed this doctrine's effectiveness. U-boats sinking merchants by deck gun averaged 8.7 vessels per patrol. Those expending torpedoes on every target averaged 3.2 vessels per patrol. The mathematics were compelling. An 88mm deck gun aboard a UC-2 class mine layer carried 130 rounds, At 2 shells per merchant, 1 at the waterline, 1 in the engine room, a single submarine could theoretically destroy 65 vessels per patrol using gunfire alone. The torpedo-armed UB-3 boats, carrying 10 torpedoes, could sink at most 10 vessels if they encountered no warships requiring engagement. Korvettenkapitän Hermann Bauer, by 1916 promoted to Führer der Unterseeboot, emphasized this doctrine in his tactical guidance to submarine commanders. The torpedo is the submarine's primary weapon against warships and armed merchants. Against defenseless commercial traffic, the deck gun accomplishes destruction at fraction of the cost while preserving torpedo stocks for encounters with enemy warships. This guidance reflected German staff college teaching that modern naval warfare required resource conservation and that submarines operating far from base with limited replenishment capability must maximize their destructive potential through careful weapon selection. German submarine commanders had substantial evidence supporting surface engagement against merchants. From February 1915 through November 1916, German U-boats sank 2,960 Allied and neutral vessels, totaling 6,394,000 tons. Of these, approximately 2,100 vessels, 71%, were destroyed by deck gun or scuttling charges following surface inspection. Submarine losses during this period numbered 48 boats, of which only 3 were definitively attributed to merchant vessel action. The operational ratio appeared overwhelming. 700 merchants sunk per U-boat lost to merchant action. The tactical environment reinforced German confidence. British and French merchants in 1914 to 1916 typically carried no armament. The Naval Defense Act of 1915 authorized arming British merchants, but implementation proceeded slowly due to gun shortages and the competing demands of the Western Front. By January 1916, only 549 of Britain's 4,837 ocean-going merchants carried any defensive armament, typically a single 12-pounder stern gun with limited ammunition and a 2-man crew. German submarines approaching on the surface could observe such armament from beyond effective range and submerge if necessary. Most important, British doctrine for armed merchants emphasized flight, not fight. Armed merchants were instructed to run from submarines, using their stern gun only to discourage pursuit. This tactical picture led German commanders to develop engagement protocols that prioritized efficiency. Approach from windward to prevent smoke interference with gunnery. Close to 800 to 1,000 yards, where 88mm or 105mm deck guns achieved maximum accuracy against stationary targets. If the merchant showed no armament and heaved to promptly, close to 200 to 300 yards to verify ship's papers and expedite crew evacuation. Position the submarine to enable rapid submergence if aircraft appeared or if the merchant proved to be a decoy. What German submarine commanders couldn't observe was the transformation occurring in Britain's dockyards and naval planning. The Admiralty, facing mounting merchant losses, 374,000 tons in April 1916 alone, recognized that defensive armament on merchants proved largely ineffective. Submarines could shell armed merchants from beyond effective range or simply torpedo them without warning. The naval staff, under First Sea Lord Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, concluded that if submarines could be induced to surface, drawn by the appearance of a vulnerable, unarmed merchant, they became vulnerable to concealed armament. The Q-ship concept originated in November 1914, when Commander Max Horton suggested modifying merchant vessels to carry hidden guns and trained naval crews. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, approved immediate implementation. The first Q-ship, the 3,000-ton collier HMS Prince Charles, sailed in December 1914, armed with 2 12-pounder guns concealed behind hinged deck panels. The conversion process, refined through 1915 to 1916, transformed ordinary merchants into elaborate deceptions. The Admiralty's Q-ship committee, established at HMS Excellent Gunnery School in Portsmouth, supervised conversions that included structural and cosmetic modifications. Below decks, shipwrights installed reinforced gun platforms, ammunition magazines with fast-access hatches, and concealment systems. The 12-pounder guns, Naval pieces with 5,200-yard maximum range were mounted on hydraulic lifts or behind panels that dropped away on signal. Crews installed steel protective shields around gun positions, disguised as deck, cargo, or ventilator housings. Some ships received additional concealment: fake deck houses hiding guns, collapsible funnels to alter silhouette, or removable deck structures that could change the vessel's apparent configuration between patrols. Above decks, the disguise extended to theatrical detail. The Admiralty employed stage designers from London theaters to create convincing merchant appearances. Wooden replicas of timber cargo, painted canvas simulating rust or damage, deliberately shabby paintwork suggesting neglect, laundry lines and domestic details suggesting merchant routine. Every element supported the illusion. Crews included personnel trained in merchant-style seamanship. Some Q ships carried panic parties, sailors dressed as merchant crew who would ostentatiously abandon ship in lifeboats when the submarine surfaced, while the remaining naval crew remained hidden at gun positions. The Royal Navy commissioned Q ships across multiple classes. Small sailing vessels like the 200-ton schooner Prize carried single 12-pounders. Medium merchants like the 3,000-ton tramp steamers Farnborough and Penshurst carried 4 12-pounders plus depth charges. Larger conversions like the 4,000-ton colliers carried 6 guns. By December 1916, the Royal Navy operated 183 Q ships, 47 sailing vessels, 102 tramp steamers, 23 coastal merchants, and 11 specialized conversions, including former German prizes. The armament philosophy emphasized overwhelming firepower at close range. A typical Q ship engagement plan called for holding fire until the submarine closed to within 800 yards, ideally 400 to 600 yards, ensuring the submarine was fully surfaced and committed to surface action. At signal, typically the white ensign raised while dropping concealment panels, all guns would open fire simultaneously. The 12-pounder fired 12.5-pound shells at 15 rounds per minute. A 4-gun Q ship could therefore deliver 60 shells per minute, creating a curtain of fire that could riddle a surfaced submarine in seconds. The tactical advantage of surprise was overwhelming. German submarines on the surface presented large targets. UC-2 class boats were 182 feet long with 17-foot beam, displacing 400 tons surfaced. The conning tower, pressure hull, deck gun crew, and diving tanks were all exposed. A submarine could submerge in 30 to 45 seconds, but this required securing the deck gun, closing hatches, and flooding tanks, time enough for a Q ship to fire 30 to 45 shells at point-blank range. Lieutenant Commander Gordon Campbell, commanding HMS Farnborough, developed the tactical doctrine other Q ships adopted. His March 1916 memorandum to the Admiralty specified, "Maintain merchant routine until submarine is fully surfaced and within 800 yards. Deploy panic party to encourage submarine approach. Fire only when submarine is committed and cannot escape. Concentrate all fire on conning tower and pressure hull to prevent diving. Continue firing until submarine sinks or crew surrenders. Rescue survivors for intelligence purposes." Q ships didn't just look like merchants, they behaved like them. They used merchant radio signals, followed real trade routes, and sailed under commercial call signs. Many even carried real cargo like timber to float longer if torpedoed. Below decks, they had reinforced bulkheads, extra pumps, and watertight compartments, allowing some to survive torpedo hits, keep the disguise, and destroy the U-boat when it surfaced to confirm the kill. The encounter between HMS Farnborough and U-83 on December 19, 1916, exemplified Q ship tactics at their most effective. Commander Gordon Campbell, a 32-year-old Royal Navy officer with 6 years destroyer experience, commanded Farnborough through careful preparation. As U-83 surfaced 700 yards off the port quarter, Campbell maintained his disguise. The panic party, 12 sailors in merchant clothing, rushed to the boats, lowering one with theatrical panic while shouting in Norwegian. Campbell, watching through a concealed periscope in the wheelhouse, counted the seconds as U-83's deck gun crew emerged and began traversing their 88mm deck gun toward Farnborough's waterline. At 600 yards, with U-83 fully surfaced and her gun crew loading, Campbell ordered the white ensign raised. The steel panels on Farnborough's midship section dropped away, revealing 4 12-pounder guns. The concealed Royal Navy gun crews opened fire simultaneously. The first salvo, fired at 3:02 p.m., struck U-83's conning tower and deck gun position. Subsequent salvos, fired at maximum rate, riddled the submarine's pressure hull and disabled her diving capabilities. U-83 attempted to submerge but had sustained catastrophic damage. She sank stern first at 3:04 p.m., approximately 2 minutes after the engagement began. Campbell recovered 27 survivors, including Captain Lieutenant Furbringer, who reported that he had never suspected Farnborough's true nature until the guns appeared. This engagement was not isolated. The Admiralty's Q-ship assessment of February 1917 documented 150 Q-ship encounters with German submarines from December 1914 through January 1917. Of these encounters, 47 resulted in submarines approaching within firing range, and 15 resulted in confirmed submarine destruction. The statistics revealed the tactical pattern. Submarines sunk by Q-ships had, in every case, fully surfaced and closed to within 1,000 yards before recognizing the deception. The most famous Q-ship action occurred on August 19, 1915, when HMS Baralong, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Godfrey Herbert, encountered U-27 attacking the merchant steamer Nicotian, 70 miles south of Ireland. U-27, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Bernhard Wegener, had surfaced to shell Nicotian when Baralong approached, displaying American colors. Herbert closed to 600 yards before revealing British identity and opening fire. U-27, caught by surprise while stationary with deck gun crew exposed, sustained multiple hits to the conning tower and pressure hull. The submarine sank within 3 minutes. Herbert then controversially fired upon U-27 survivors who had swum to Nicotian, resulting in diplomatic protests and establishing Baralong as both a tactical success and a political embarrassment. HMS Penshurst achieved the most tactically perfect Q-ship victory on July 24, 1915. Commanded by Lieutenant Mark Wardlaw, Penshurst encountered U-36, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Ernst Graeff, 40 miles west of the Scilly Isles. U-36 surfaced and closed to inspect Penshurst's papers, approaching to 200 yards, point-blank range for Q-ship armament. Wardlaw held fire until U-36 was stationary alongside. His 4 12-pounders fired 37 shells in 90 seconds, every shell hitting U-36's pressure hull or conning tower. U-36 sank immediately with all hands. 34 crew lost. German naval intelligence later assessed this action as demonstrating that British Q-ships could be indistinguishable from genuine merchants even at inspection range. The sailing vessel Q-ships achieved several notable successes despite their slower speed and limited armament. HMS Prize, a 200-ton schooner commanded by Lieutenant William Sanders, sank U-93 on April 30, 1917, through exceptional patience. U-93 had surfaced to inspect Prize's cargo when Sanders, having maintained his merchant disguise for 45 minutes of close interaction, opened fire at 50 yards with his single 12-pounder. The first shell struck U-93's conning tower, killing the commander and disabling the submarine's diving controls. Prize fired 12 additional shells before U-93 sank. Sanders received the Victoria Cross. Prize's success demonstrated that even minimal Q-ship armament could destroy submarines if tactical surprise was achieved. Statistical analysis revealed Q-ship effectiveness despite modest absolute numbers. From December 1914 through November 1918, Royal Navy Q-ships achieved 11 confirmed submarine destructions: U-36, U-27, U-68, U-40, U-85, U-83, UC-29, UC-33, UB-26, UB-37, and U-93. An additional 7 submarines were probably damaged by Q-ship action but escaped. Against this, 27 Q-ships were lost to submarine action, 15 torpedoed without warning, and 12 sunk by gunfire after their identity was revealed. However, the tactical impact exceeded simple kill ratios. Q-ships forced operational changes throughout the German submarine fleet. After HMS Baralong's August 1915 action, German commanders received warnings about disguised vessels. The Admiral Stab's tactical guidance of November 1915 advised increased caution when engaging lone merchants in British coastal waters. By mid-1916, many commanders preferred submerged torpedo attacks to surface gun actions, even against apparently defenseless merchants. The German submarine service recognized the Q-ship threat through painful experience. Each submarine loss was investigated by the Admiral Stab's Submarine Warfare Section, and the pattern became unmistakable. Korvettenkapitän Hermann Bauer's assessment of March 1916 acknowledged, "British Q-ships represent a tactical innovation that exploits our doctrine regarding surface engagement of merchants. Commanders must recognize that any merchant vessel in British waters may conceal naval armament." The operational evidence mounted through 1916. U-boat commanders reported increasing numbers of merchant encounters where vessels displayed unusual characteristics: excessive wireless activity, suspicious course changes when submarines appeared, panic parties that seemed too organized, merchants in areas without logical cargo routes. German naval intelligence compiled reports from neutral sources confirming British Q-ship operations. By October 1916, German estimates, remarkably accurate, assessed British Q-ship strength at 150 to 180 vessels, operating primarily in the western approaches, Irish Sea and English Channel. The tactical adaptation proceeded in stages. Initial guidance, issued in February 1916, advised commanders to observe merchants from periscope depth before surfacing, looking for concealed armament, naval-style crew activity, or suspicious damage patterns. Submarines were instructed to surface at 1,500-plus yards, beyond effective range of 12-pounder guns, and shell merchants from that distance, rather than closing for inspection. If the merchant behaved suspiciously, sailing toward rather than away from the submarine, showing no panic, or transmitting wireless, commanders should submerge immediately and torpedo without warning. By July 1916, doctrine shifted further. The Admiral Stab's guidance emphasized torpedo attacks over surface engagement in high-threat areas. British coastal waters, defined as within 100 miles of the British Isles, were designated maximum threat zones where surface engagement was discouraged. Commanders were authorized to torpedo merchants without warning in these zones, even vessels showing no armament or hostile intent. This represented a significant tactical shift. Submarines were now assuming all merchants might be Q-ships, treating surface engagements as unacceptable risk. The economic impact was exactly what British planners intended. Torpedoes that might have sunk Allied warships or large valuable merchants were instead expended on small coastal vessels that might be Q-ships. German torpedo consumption increased dramatically. 4,821 torpedoes fired in 1915, 7,904 in 1916, 10,568 in 1917. The German torpedo manufacturing infrastructure struggled to meet demand. The two primary manufacturers, Friedrichshafen Torpedo Works and Weser Torpedo Works, employed 6,400 workers in 1915. By 1917, employment had expanded to 18,900 workers, with production reaching 880 torpedoes per month. But this barely kept pace, with consumption rates exceeding 900 torpedoes per month. The tactical mathematics shifted against German submarines. Pre-Q ship operations achieved merchant destruction at approximately 100 marks per vessel, the cost of deck gun ammunition. Post-Q ship operations, with increased torpedo usage, approached 25,000 marks per vessel, 250 times the previous cost. This economic transformation reduced German submarine warfare effectiveness even as U-boat numbers increased. Germany commissioned 375 submarines during the war, but could not maintain the cost-effectiveness of early operations. Individual commanders adapted their tactics to the Q-ship threat. Kapitänleutnant Lothar von Arnold de la Perrière, the most successful submarine commander of the war, with 194 merchant ships and 453,000 tons sunk, developed protocols that minimized Q-ship risk. His operational reports emphasized prolonged observation from periscope depth, surface engagement only in areas of minimal Q-ship activity, immediate submergence if merchant behavior seemed abnormal, and wireless intelligence to identify known Q-ship operating areas. Von Arnold's caution cost operational tempo. His average patrol duration increased from 18 days in 1915 to 24 days in 1917, but achieved survival across 15 patrols. Less cautious commanders paid with their lives. U-83's Capitan Lieutenant Furbringer survived his encounter with HMS Farnborough and provided detailed intelligence during his captivity. His interrogation report, preserved in British naval intelligence files, revealed the fundamental problem. The vessel appeared in every respect to be a Norwegian freighter in distress. Her list, her shifted cargo, her distress signals, all elements suggested a legitimate target. Only when the guns appeared did we recognize our error. By then, escape was impossible. German counter-tactics evolved throughout 1917 as submarine crews learned to recognize Q-ship indicators. Experienced commanders developed detailed checklists for merchant evaluation. The Admiral Stab's guidance of April 1917 specified warning signs. Merchants sailing alone in known patrol areas when convoy system made this unusual. Vessels showing damage patterns but still making way effectively. Ships that didn't alter course when submarines appeared. Crew behavior that seemed too disciplined for merchant service. Wireless activity inconsistent with genuine distress. And vessels in locations where no cargo route justified their presence. Some German commanders developed aggressive counter-tactics. Rather than simply avoiding suspicious vessels, they engaged from maximum range with deliberate intent to expose Q-ships. Kapitan Lieutenant Walther Schwieger of U-20, who had torpedoed Lusitania in May 1915, reported in July 1917, engaging a suspicious merchant from 4,000 yards with his deck gun, deliberately firing short to observe the response. When the merchant returned fire with accuracy suggesting naval gunnery, Schwieger submerged and torpedoed the vessel. Post-war records confirmed this was HMS Tulip, a Q-ship that survived the torpedo hit but lost her effectiveness as her identity was compromised. The tactical evolution became a recognition contest. Q-ships adopted increasingly sophisticated disguises, deliberate hull corrosion using acid to simulate merchant neglect, actual cargo loaded to provide legitimate reason for routes, captured German wireless codes to transmit convincing distress calls, and crew members with merchant marine experience to handle ships with authentic merchant techniques. Some Q-ships operated in pairs. One vessel would act as bait while a second vessel, also disguised, waited nearby to catch submarines that successfully identified the first Q-ship and surfaced to attack from safe distance. German submarines countered with periscope observations that could extend for hours. Commanders would shadow suspicious merchants from periscope depth, observing for any indication of naval discipline. Crew changes conducted too precisely, deck routines that suggested naval rather than merchant practice, or wireless transmissions that, when triangulated, revealed the merchant was reporting position to naval authorities rather than to company headquarters. By late 1917, the tactical balance had shifted. British Q-ships encountered submarines less frequently, as German commanders became increasingly cautious. The Admiralty's Q-ship operations analysis of December 1917 showed declining effectiveness. 42 submarine encounters in 1915, 61 in 1916, but only 23 in 1917, despite increased Q-ship numbers. The percentage of encounters resulting in submarine destruction also declined, 15.8% in 1915 to 1916, but only 4.3% in 1917 to 1918. The Q-ship program achieved strategic impact beyond its direct kill statistics. The 11 confirmed submarine destructions represented approximately 3% of total German submarine losses during the war. However, the tactical influence was profound. Q-ships forced German submarine doctrine away from efficient surface engagement toward wasteful torpedo expenditure. British naval intelligence assessments calculated the economic impact. Each torpedo a German submarine expended on a merchant that might be a Q-ship represented a torpedo unavailable for warship engagement. The German submarine service fired approximately 23,000 torpedoes during the war, of which roughly 16,000 targeted merchant vessels. If 30% of these merchant attacks were conducted from submerged positions due to Q-ship concerns, a conservative estimate based on German operational reports. This represented 4,800 torpedoes expended that might otherwise have been conserved for warship engagement or avoided entirely through surface gun action. The production burden was substantial. Germany's torpedo manufacturers struggled to maintain 880 torpedoes per month production through 1917 to 1918, requiring 18,900 workers and diverting copper, steel, and explosives from other naval programs. By comparison, Britain's 183 Q-ships required approximately 12,000 naval personnel, a force that, while significant, was far smaller than the industrial commitment Germany made to maintain torpedo production rates, driven partly by Q-ship-induced tactical caution. The psychological impact extended throughout the German submarine service. Post-war analysis of German submarine war diaries revealed that commanders referenced Q-ships, or suspicious merchants, in approximately 2,400 patrol entries from 1916 to 1918. The mere possibility of Q-ships influenced tactical decisions even when actual Q-ships were absent. This psychological burden reduced operational efficiency. Commanders who spent hours observing potential targets from periscope depth, who avoided surface engagements in favorable tactical situations, or who expended torpedoes when deck gun action would have sufficed, all demonstrated how Q-ships influenced German submarine warfare beyond their direct combat actions. The operational strain showed in casualty patterns. Of the 11 U-boats sunk by Q-ships, 9 were lost with all or nearly all hands. The crews had approached what they believed were defenseless merchants, only to be caught in point-blank ambushes with no escape possibility. These losses reinforced throughout the submarine service that surface engagement carried catastrophic risk. German submarine crews understood destroyer attacks, mine warfare, and depth charge dangers. These were risks that could be managed through skill and vigilance. Q-ships represented a different threat, perfect mimicry that could only be detected when it was too late to escape. British merchant morale benefited from Q-ship operations. Every publicized Q-ship success reminded merchant crews that the Royal Navy was actively hunting submarines using innovative tactics. The psychological value of offensive action, even limited in scale, contrasted with the passive defensive measures, convoy, escort, mine barriers, patrol zones, that characterized much of anti-submarine warfare. Q-ships demonstrated that submarines were vulnerable, that clever tactics could turn the hunter into the hunted. German submarine commanders who survived the war acknowledged Q-ships' tactical innovation in post-war memoirs and assessments. Counter-Admiral Hermann Bauer, the Führer der Unterseeboot throughout most of the war, wrote in his 1925 memoir, "The British Q-ship program represented tactical creativity we had not anticipated. By exploiting our doctrine of surface engagement against merchants, they forced adaptations that reduced our operational effectiveness. We learned, but the learning cost submarines and forced tactical changes that increased our torpedo expenditure significantly." Kapitän-Leutnant Lothar von Arnold de la Perrière, whose 194 merchant ships sunk, made him the war's most successful submarine commander, reflected in 1920. Q-ships changed how we approached merchant warfare. In 1915, we surfaced confidently. By 1917, every merchant was suspect. This caution reduced our efficiency and forced us to expend torpedoes we might have conserved. The British innovation was not the concept of disguised vessels. This was ancient warfare, but the scale and sophistication of implementation. British assessments emphasized Q-ships' role in the broader anti-submarine campaign. Admiral Sir John Jellicoe's post-war analysis noted, Q-ships sank relatively few submarines, but they forced German commanders to adopt tactics that reduced their effectiveness. The submarine that refuses surface engagement, that fires torpedoes at minor merchants from safe distance, that spends hours observing rather than attacking, this submarine sinks fewer ships per patrol. Q-ships achieved their strategic purpose by making German submarines less efficient. The tactical lessons influenced naval thinking well beyond World War I. The Q-ship concept, armed vessels disguised as non-combatants to achieve tactical surprise, was studied by multiple navies during the interwar period. The Soviet Navy experimented with disguised auxiliaries in the 1920s. The German Navy, ironically, employed disguised auxiliary cruisers in World War II, vessels like Atlantis and Cormoran that used merchant appearance to approach Allied ships. These raiders embodied the same principle Q-ships had demonstrated. Perfect mimicry enables tactical surprise that overcomes conventional combat power disadvantages. The ethical debates about Q-ships continued for decades. Critics argued that Q-ships violated the spirit, if not the letter, of naval warfare laws by deliberately deceiving enemy forces about their combatant status. The use of false flags, many Q-ships approached submarines displaying neutral colors before revealing British identity, particularly drew criticism. The HMS Baralong incident of August 1915, where survivors were killed after U-27 sank, became a case study in how innovative tactics could create ethical complications. Defenders countered that Q-ships operated within established laws of naval warfare. They flew false flags during approach, but revealed true identity, the white ensign, before opening fire, as international law required. They were properly commissioned warships under lawful authority, carrying naval crews and operating under naval command. The tactical deception was no different than camouflage or other accepted combat deceptions. The survivors' treatment in some incidents reflected the brutal nature of submarine warfare on both sides, not a systematic Q-ship policy. Modern analysis recognizes Q-ships as exemplifying tactical adaptation under resource constraints. Britain faced mounting merchant losses and limited ability to provide convoy escort for all vessels. Q-ships offered a solution that required modest investment, converting existing hulls with available armament, but achieved strategic impact through forcing German tactical changes. The program demonstrated how smaller forces could influence larger forces through innovation and by exploiting enemy doctrine. The Q-ship legacy extended to the fundamental understanding that industrial warfare required continuous tactical adaptation. German submarines forced Britain to develop convoys, depth charges, hydrophones, and Q-ships. Britain's anti-submarine measures forced Germany to develop torpedo tactics, longer-range operations, and improved submarine designs. This pattern of measure and countermeasure, innovation and response, became characteristic of naval warfare in the industrial age. Lieutenant Commander Gordon Campbell, whose HMS Farnborough sank U-83 in December 1916, received the Victoria Cross for his action. He commanded Q-ships throughout the war, surviving multiple torpedo hits and sinking 3 submarines. His 1919 memoir captured the Q-ship experience. "We sailed as merchants, dressed as merchants, behaved as merchants, knowing that our only advantage was deception. The moment a submarine recognized us, we became a nearly defenseless target for torpedo attack. Our success depended on maintaining the illusion until the submarine was committed." It was warfare built on patience, theater, and the willingness to appear vulnerable while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The 183 Q-ships that served in the Royal Navy represented a unique naval innovation. Warships designed not to appear powerful, but to appear weak. Not to display armament, but to conceal it. Not to intimidate, but to invite attack. Their modest success in direct combat kills, 11 submarines sunk, understated their strategic impact in forcing German submarines to abandon efficient surface gun tactics and adopt wasteful torpedo expenditure. In the larger narrative of World War I naval warfare, Q-ships exemplified how industrial powers could not merely build more ships and guns, but must constantly innovate in how those ships and guns were employed. The German submarine crews who surfaced confidently in 1915 and cautiously in 1917 demonstrated how quickly tactical assumptions could be overturned when faced with an enemy willing to embrace deception, risk, and theatrical misdirection in pursuit of strategic advantage.